Welcome to the March 26th
notes.
meeting of the 2229 Main Street Advisory Task Force. I'm the chair of the task force, Paul Bohm, and we'll start by calling the roll. If we do have a forum tonight, I'm
Harry Flood is
Barry
here.
Flood.
Carl
Carl
Simon
Simon is here.
David Ropey here.
David Rugby,
Rich Feely
Rich
here.
Feeler, and Paul Bohm is here. And Rich will be taking minutes tonight. Yes. We do not have minutes to review tonight. They didn't make it to me. Kurt was tied up, so we'll have two sets of minutes to review the next meeting, which is going to be on the April 16th. I'm gonna go over the meeting schedule because there's been some confusion on that, and Chris and I are working to get that posted on our website. So we'll have all the meetings for the remaining through October on the website. The locations will vary a bit because it's been a little tough getting room. So welcome to those on Zoom, and we have a pretty light agenda tonight, so I can't imagine the meeting going full term, but we'll see. So what I want to do tonight, and we have the agenda in front of you. There is no work meeting packet because there are no the only document that we'll talk about is document that Carl produced on grant opportunities. And there were I didn't have the minutes, so I thought the meeting packet was not essential for tonight, but you have that information in front of you. For those on Zoom, we'll post that document on the website along with the minutes. So there will be a meeting packet after the fact posted for this meeting.
Just because this is still in draft form, so a final version.
Okay,
Yeah,
we'll get the final version of that on there. So I do want to go through any work stream updates, if any. Then Carl's going to lead the discussion of grant opportunities, and the folks at SKIO have reviewed that and given some input on that. Thank you for that. I do want to go over the upcoming meetings because they're going to get complicated in the next couple of months between the briefings that we're going to get and the public hearing that we're preparing for and the select board meeting. So I just kind of want to review things leading up to that. Then we'll have public comment and adjourn. So first order of business on work stream updates. On the risk, you want to talk about the discussion we had with Rue on their work and.
There isn't a lot to update. We're back and forth over some of the little details of their report. Fill in for me as I go. There wasn't anything really substantial. Paul brought his concerns about like area 4, the cooling pond and stuff. And basically Rue said, no problem, we'll work that into our report to you. That was the gist of it to me. I mean, I don't think there was anything really substantive. They heard our desire to coordinate with CARA and EPA. We're pleased with that. What else can I think of?
That's about it. We're jumping a bit ahead. They're going to brief the task force on April 25th, which is a Thursday meeting. So we all get up to speed on that, and especially the reuse group, because the reuse group and the risk group, that information clearly has to merge into sort of the reuse recommendation. So that's going to be an important integration meeting, at least for those two work streams. So that's being planned. Also, as David mentioned, CARA and EPA have requested that they go over the details with Rue and have the risk assessors and Rue's risk assessors talking. And I don't have a date for that, CARA, or I haven't seen a date, but I know that Chris has been talking to Rue. We'll kind of converge on that, but that's kind of in the works. We'll have to offline. We'll have to get a date for that, a separate meeting. And that'll be a deeper technical meeting than probably the briefing that we'll get. Well, it depends. We can go as deep as we want technically on that. So I guess that I think they made good progress. They're just about done. They have to write the report. They have to brief us. But I think that has come up really well.
may I add one thing?
Yeah,
It's not about that meeting, but it's building off of that meeting. I've been thinking about the outreach work that I promised at the first public meeting and haven't done enough of. And so based on the progress that's been made at the site and with Rue's analysis and so forth, I've been considering and would like the group's feedback on the idea of reaching out to a handful of environmentally active or concerned or informed citizens to have just a private conversation, not an update, a briefing, nothing official, maybe even a site visit, to make that part of the community feel reached out to.
I think it's a really good idea. I'm just thinking about the sequence of things. Off the top of my head, I think to have Rue brief the task force and to invite those folks to listen in on that. And then follow up on that with whatever meetings they, so like EPA has requested some detailed meetings, and I think the public individuals can request those as well. We'll have to see if we can accommodate that within Rue's budget, but if that makes sense, the sequence, they brief us, those folks listen in so that they get the big picture, then we have separate meetings with them as desired.
That makes complete sense, except that, excuse me, not except, well, it's kind of a but. The briefings that we're gonna get from Rue are gonna be diving into really weedsy layers of stuff.
I'm not sure, well, maybe.
Potentially, and what I had in mind was more of an intro, here's what's up level conversation, which I feel might be more appropriate to people who haven't followed in as much detail as we have.
Would you suggest
I don't
that
know.
these visitors would be free to ask questions?
Oh, yeah, conversation.
Everything, so conversation,
Absolutely.
not just a presentation.
So they feel heard and questions answered and addressed, and it's partly, it's this relationship management stuff I always talk about. And it's partly for our process, but it's also, since we will make a recommendation one way or the other to the select board, and the select board will ultimately have to act on that. The relationships that we're starting to form toward that action will be foundational to help that too, that next phase. So it's kind of,
Well, I think we fully support what you're gonna do, just,
Okay.
and maybe that, that briefing of those individuals is just you briefing them without Rue, or you want?
I don't think it needs Rue.
No.
I had it as more informal in my
Yeah.
mind than that, but it's an idea. I'm not just declaring
And
it.
you're gonna be fully conversant.
Pretty
at a high level
much.
on what they're gonna
Risk
present.
stuff, yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And
David, could you frame it as a context of inviting them to the Rue meeting?
Oh, yeah.
So in other words, you reach out to environmentalists and say, we're gonna have this risk assessment update from the town's risk assessor on the process, and you know, is there anything you'd like feedback about before that, and can we encourage you to come?
Yeah, oh, absolutely for that one, but what I was thinking about in addition, I guess, well, I'll put it that way, is. You know, there's this thing that's hanging out there with all these words that are superabundant chemicals and things that you have had concerns about, and I just wanted to make sure that if you wanted to have a conversation about it, ultimately we'll be hearing from our risk assessors in more detail. And so it could be both.
yeah,
Well, but the other thing is just reaching out to someone to say, hey, it's, you know, there's this thing coming up. We'd love it
yeah.
if you came, do you
Yes.
want to sit and talk about what's going on, so that we can put it in context before this meeting and encourage you to come to the meeting? That's.
How about, you know, and are there specific topics you would like to see covered? Like,
Yeah,
what
what
could
questions,
we
right,
be
listening as
prepared
much as
for?
talking, for sure, so.
So having heard this conversation, let me flip my suggestion. Maybe you have a conversation with them beforehand. This is what we've been doing. Come to this meeting to hear more
Yeah.
details, so you can kind of frame it,
Mhm.
big picture, so what the overall objective is, and then, yeah, invite them to the meeting, so.
I'm open to all of your suggestions to who to invite. Small group, bigger,
Mhm.
Why don't you take the lead, do what everything is best on, I think communication is
Well-
really important,
thank you, but your input is
yeah.
gonna make it better.
Just want to make sure that messaging is consistent, and I'm sure there will be. We don't want loose threads running around before the report is actually out, you know?
Yeah.
So. Okay, good idea, Rich.
David, I usually go to these conservation ecology coffees every month.
Yeah.
Do you want me to sort of say, we're thinking about this? If anybody's interested in meeting with David and, talking about this, can let me know who you are.
That would be fine, although I've gone to them in the past and had, as Pam knows, gone to one prior to our public meeting as part of the invite stuff, so. I always get the invites, I forget when the next.
It's the next one,
Tuesday.
next Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. How about if I drag my ass out of bed and show up?
Yeah, 7:30, but there is coffee.
There is coffee and coffee cake, and I usually
Okay,
donate
great.
more than it's worth, but go ahead. I'll make it up.
Okay, thanks.
I think it's a good idea. I think the work is really interesting and pertinent. And, it's gonna be sort of central to the whole reuse, activity. Okay, anything else on risk? The legal work stream isn't here, but, we're forming up to have this, executive session on the 16th. Well, actually, let me kind of jump ahead on that since you're going work stream by work stream. I'm sort of thinking of the questions, the topics that I think are important to the task force in terms of like what Mina and the legal stream might be briefing on. But just the thoughts on what you want to learn. I mean, there's some obvious things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about acquisition method, what Mina's thinking about, the liability protections that or I'll call it the Superfund chemicals. Because of past sins, the liability protections. We're going to be talking about the legal obligations of the town as an owner, right? Distribution controls, etc. Probably won't be touching on insurance per se, but that might come up. And importantly, what we know about the upfront costs, if any, to the town in terms of liens and mortgages and what that, because I think all those have to be in our report. So and a lot of those it kind of covers most of what I'm thinking of the legal landscape. But Carl, do you have anything?
And maybe this is under the legal obligation as ownership, but I had stuck in my mind this one aspect of the charge from the select board to identify any sort of federal and state laws that the town would be subject to if it required it, something like that, a specific question of the charge.
Okay.
So if there, my only concern is that might have fallen through the cracks with the bigger kind of liability and acquisition issues, so if Mina's done any work on that, if anything significant's come up, anything that's not really obvious.
And I'm wondering if as an owner of a property, is there anything specific in that regard?
Yeah.
That's above and beyond the normal ownership of a
Yeah.
property.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good topic. Rich,
One question that I have that I haven't heard discussed so far is if the town acquires but wants some uses that are not direct town. Think scenario 2 with an assisted living facility or residences for ARC or something like that. And there's some transaction with that party, whether it's a long-term lease. Does EPA have some recovery? One can argue with those clients, the town may not be making money on it, but there would be some transaction there.
Yeah. Those details are gonna be negotiated, but in general, on the revenue sharing, if the town generates some revenue from some leasing activity, at least theoretically, there'll be some revenue sharing from the town, not by the assisted living people, but any tax revenue, but theoretically, that would be shared. So,
No, but do we owe money back to EPA?
we discussed this, like, part of our understanding of the terms of releasing the federal liens is an agreement that there'll be some revenue sharing. Exactly what so when you said, do we owe them? Probably,
There would be revenue sharing,
there would be revenue sharing.
not just something between the lessee and the town.
There-
Well, with that, let's say, there's a $10,000 a month. The terms of the lease, so the financial terms of the lease, there'll be some obligation. We can't go into it further than that, but there is any aspect of revenue or, if the agreement with EPA permits us to sell part of the site, there'll be some revenue sharing in that. So I mean, all those are gonna have to be negotiated as part of the settlement agreement with EPA.
But you're saying there would be some obligation to the extent the town, quote unquote, profited
Right.
from non-town uses.
That's my understanding. It's all out there for negotiation. Maybe there's certain types of activities that would not be under that banner, I don't know.
I can see a couple of different models, one in which the land would be sold and somebody builds a building on it, a piece of it. And the other would be a land lease with some agreement about the long-term settlement if that outfit wants to, no longer have that senior center kind of thing like that.
These are all good questions. When we have this session, these are all good questions. But I think you'll hear, the specifics of all this, I'll call it revenue sharing. Those have to be worked out in the settlement agreement with EPA. Yeah.
This circles back to a question that I raised a moment ago, and I'll just put it back on the table and then we can move on. I think when we make our charge to the select board and we talk about the costs to acquire, we also have to talk about the potential economic gain to acquire. So how much of that is taken away by this short revenue sharing, whatever, but I think we have to have a cost and benefit economic aspect to our presentation. I just wanted to reiterate that point because some people are gonna look at this question through that lens, I think.
I agree, but it's a difficult one to get our hands around because it really depends on the reuse scenario. I mean, we're gonna recommend several options. And it's gonna be up to the next phase 2 of this for the town to plan exactly what they're doing. So, I mean.
Details to follow.
Qualitatively.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, right. Details to follow, but
There's tax revenue, there's perhaps, more efficient and newer services.
some language to speak to both sides of that equation. As best we can.
I'm thinking about how this report, because I'm gonna do an outline for the report.
Yeah.
Who needs to write that up? I think it's these guys.
Well,
Because-
probably more.
So the economics of ownership, but it's dependent on sort of.
I think we'll end up, whatever comes out of this phase of work, it will speak to that,
Yeah,
at least at a qualitative,
In general.
level, yes. Because, it would be irresponsible to just point out the cost without indicating that there's also gonna be benefits.
yeah, and we're gonna have to get our hands around the costs. I mean, I talked about some entry costs, right? Are there any, to acquire the site, are there any obligations? But then there's operation costs that, and that has to be all part of an economics discussion, and then the opportunity, so yes.
Well, if it's operating cost of a need of the town, if it's really a need, it will be done here or there, and there will be a difference in the cost. But it doesn't suddenly disappear,
So when I put together this outline, we're gonna spend some time reviewing the outline to make sure everything is in. And then we'll figure out who needs to write it, but I want to look back at the charge and. Because part of the charge was recommendations whether to acquire the site and if this would be a good business decision. I'm not sure how to frame that exactly, but we need to address.
Could be.
business part.
Put that in. Could be. Yes.
Depends on what your criteria for this.
So that's the legal.
That sounds like a good paragraph to end the economics of ownership part of the report, is whether it would be a good business decision on the
Well,
site,
that's-
and whether it was a good business decision for other sites.
Well, I'd make a distinction between a good financial decision versus a good business decision, that the business of the town. There could be barriers to this acquiring the site for, what is the business of town, providing certain services to the residents of the town. Even if that imposes some financial cost.
It just
It
seems
might
like
be
it-
the best option to address certain needs the town has.
Just
Not
seems
that
like
we
it should
know,
be
not
more
that
in
we'll
that
know it at
section.
the time.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I think when we get around to this, the select board briefing, will invite them. And there'll be at least one, if not two, new select board members to look at that charge and say, anything has changed in your mind, because this MCI, there's lots of changes in town since that was written, so, you know, I think we'll get input from them, what. In addition, what's important to cover.
I mean,
I hope.
it will be tricky to change the charge in a major way, too late in the process of.
We're not gonna change the charge, but it's, you know, the extent to which we cover any particular activity. You know, it could be a paragraph or,
Right.
it could be a paragraph or 4-page, actuarial table.
Hopefully not.
Okay, so that's sort of the legal upstream, so. Issues, on reuse, anything,
Not really, I'd say the only thing is I did, read all the way through the recreation plan.
you read the appendices too? No,
Well, I'm not sure that I can recite the chapter and verse, but I did look at them.
Yeah.
The bottom line being that, you know, if you look at the three scenarios, particularly scenario 3, there's room there for quite a bit of what the town or the recreation board is saying are priorities. The question now is, as it is with all the other uses, what's the risk associated with that? But there's no longer in that document something that I saw in September, which was a plan to use the entire site for recreation. Now there are additions to the town's recreation inventory that are prioritized, but there's not something that says we gotta have the whole site.
no, so Weston and Sampson came up with several scenarios, one of which it was that graphic and using the whole site for. But that was kind of shoved into the, you know, the back of the report, but I mean, part of that site.
You know, so I think what I'm saying is that what we have now is consistent with that.
No,
I mean, the town has to decide what its priorities are. Certainly, scenario 3 leaves room for, if not the whole indoor facility, quite a bit of the playing fields, the playground, the dog park, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
That are in there. The one question I had, did we ever, I know we distributed the scenarios, but we also have a spreadsheet that shows who we talked to and what we learned. And did that ever get in the record, Paul?
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
Okay, let me be sure that I get the latest version from Skio and we'll put that in the.
Yeah, and I'm glad we talked about that. I don't know what happened to.
Yes, I don't think I ever specifically submitted it, but I'll get it to you. And then, you know, our next task is, okay, so which of these things that we think there is demand for, is feasible and on what part of the site? That's the next step.
Yeah, sort of, on the record, but off the record, public meetings, it's on the record. On the housing side, do you see any less of a demand for housing on the site because of residents that Thoreau and Novo and other things, or is it kind of?
Well, I don't think, I mean, even if Thoreau goes through, there will be demand for additional housing in Concord. On the other hand, you know, I would argue that it would be much better on the MCI site than it would out there, but I think that depends. I think the assisted living facility is slightly different because there's less traffic back and forth to work and stuff like that.
And kids in the school.
Yeah,
I can see the concentration of family housing. Mixed use, whatever, driving the need to redistrict the school lines.
Yeah, if you put
For
another,
elementary.
you know,
Yeah,
if Thorough goes through, you're adding probably somewhere 30 to 50 kids in the school system, I would guess.
now there's been a downward trend, so it may be.
Yeah, right,
Okay, but,
They just don't.
but it will have a factor one way or another.
I mean, I think it's fair to say that we, you know, we will have one, if not two 40Bs for sure. And we're not gonna get the MCI site unless there's housing on some of that.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I wouldn't at this point recommend anything other than specialty housing there. By that, you know, something like the assisted living facility.
Yeah, to a no-go, maybe something will be residences, hopefully something acceptable. And then we have Junction Village, which is down the road too, right?
Yeah, which will happen hopefully faster than the redevelopment of MCO.
Yeah, and that's even without MCI. No. And just, it's a light agenda, so we can ramble around here. In the reuse scenarios, you really haven't located any site yet. But I'm just thinking about the hill, which we call A2. Is there anything other than housing that could be done on that hill?
Put your dog park there,
What's that?
put the dog park there.
Yeah.
And I mean, that would, you put the dog park there, you could put a Minuteman ARC. You know, residential facility on the edge of it, things like that.
But an area that's never been touched by the operation, so. I mean, I like dogs, but they can go anywhere.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that the point of using that A2 would be that that is an area that if we wanted to develop it for any reason, we could get it leveled for
Right.
us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could get a site, a lot of site preparation done because they would be happy to use the soil on that site to grade the rest of the.
As long as
site.
we're rambling, I'll give voice to the several people who said, don't cut down any trees that don't have to be.
Well,
That's gonna be a voice in there too, so I just put that one out there because I've heard
well, there's certain people have written certain letters to certain things
it.
about trees and residences to throw on the number of trees can be sacrificed in that development.
Yeah,
It's a.
or that constituency is a real one,
Oh, yeah,
needs
absolutely.
to be respected.
Okay, so now,
And just some news on the operations, work plan, I have. With Megan's help, we have gotten information now from Public Works. From police department, the fire department. And light plant. And then I've spoken to two developers, one of whom gave, you know, infrastructure costs for a project. He is, you know, completing now in Concord and in Carlisle. And the second one is the developer for the reuse of the paparazzi site. He won't have, he hasn't put it out to bid yet, so he might have data by the end of April, so we can use that. But what I'm hoping to do is pull together the information I do have and come up with, you know, what it indicates for potential infrastructure costs, and there isn't a lot on the operating side. I mean, the police department pretty much said that they don't see any new costs beyond what they'd incur servicing the overall growth of Concord. You know, they didn't say this site in particular. The fire department, on the other hand, sees this site, if this site was to get developed for either of the housing options in conjunction with the other projects that are online, you know, there would be a staffing and even potentially an equipment impact on the department, so.
I do think we're gonna have to show a specific plan, a specific line item for management of the institution controls.
Yeah.
I think there's concern about that, and I talked several times about that we would write up
I mean,
a plan of how to do that, and that's gonna require some security, it's gonna require some inspection. It may require a separate staff.
I don't know, I
person to do
mean,
that.
yeah, I think we can indicate what new requirements it might have for the town. I don't wanna get in the business of trying to budget that for the town. I think we don't really know fully yet. You know, it's gonna be somewhat different.
I just wanna
Once
get
the
on the
final
institution.
site.
On the cost of the institutional controls, I'm harkening back to the research that we did with other communities, none of them said that that was in any way a big deal.
Hmm.
Cost, staff, nothing. I don't remember any of them saying it was staff. I don't remember at all, and with time or cost at all. Now, our site is different, right? We got wells and da, 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 da. But again, I just wanna offer that one input point to the conversation about ICs.
Well, there's
And
gonna be,
it seems to me that the communities that weren't interested were just not interested and didn't do great deep studies before they said no, thank you.
No, I'm talking about the ones that did
No, I know.
acquire,
Yeah.
Scala, instead of.
But of course, there's a particular sensitivity at this side.
Yes.
With this select board,
Yes,
that they have that covered.
well, I think,
And
I understand, and we should.
I don't know what the cost is, but we have to.
I mean, minimally, there are gonna be staff responsibilities when it comes to like permitting projects and permitting construction activities. So
See
there's,
here.
there's certainly gonna be some training and
Yeah.
processes. I don't necessarily think it's like a full-time staff person that's gonna be needed, but there's gonna be some cost. I guess Chris is still hoping to, trying to get an estimate for liability insurance, which, you know, will give us a very rough figure. We won't really know until we know what the terms of the acquisition are. So we'll have some information, but I don't think we could put a number on it.
And all of the sites we looked at had wells that were actively pumping and treating, and landfills that were capped that couldn't be disturbed. They-
Vapor intrusion that had to be monitored in Ashland, et cetera.
Yeah.
But you're right, we have to address it. I just mean to add, well, as long as I see it's popped up.
Maybe the best way to address it, we pull experiences from other sides.
Well, that'd be part of what we cite for sure.
Yeah.
But we need to get some details of our own, because there are some uniquenesses, but I just wanted to interject there quickly that there's this
Right.
one information point that helps that conversation.
But I think relative to the infrastructure costs the town would face if it acquired the site and used it for itself, it's gonna be a small number.
Did Public Works suggest they really are interested in moving?
I didn't, that was.
That would be your use.
That would,
I mean, what we got was essentially, we're open to it. We're not as firmly opposed to it as they were with the prior.
But they're not looking.
They're not looking, but they're not opposed. I think they're feeling somewhat constrained on their current site. Their idea of being centrally located, she said this may be less important now. And this is when they cited the example of the guys used to come back for lunch, but now, now there's so much traffic, they stay where they are for lunch. So, no, I mean, nobody's is jumping up and down to get out there. But if it were in the town's interest, I don't think they'd fight it.
I was just remembering Walpole was real eager to find a site for their public safety group. I mean, they were looking, they were shopping.
but the town's working on a facilities plan.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so that they'll have to factor in this site and MCI.
Yeah, and then
other
the other
options.
thing to bear in mind is that that land is immediately, is actually between two MBTA zones. So in the long run, if they did move, that wouldn't be a bad place with relatively dense house.
What had been uncomfortable congestion, you might say, of that site 20 years ago, I'm thinking of this, was improved by moving the municipal light plant out to the other side of the rotary. And initially, they were thinking moving both there and just leaving the planning and open space as far as I can remember. But it got a lot better for Public Works when the light plant wasn't there anymore. So it's not as,
Yeah.
there's not as much pressure as.
It's not, sort of a demand commensurate with their need to spend more money on paving the streets, but I mean, I think it's something that, if it were part of the town priority, I don't think it would be fought terribly. But that's a
But
joke.
not shop, not looking either. Okay,
Not
thank you.
yet. They're not in the market at the moment for this.
Okay, so I want to get to the grant opportunities, but I'm flipping around a little bit because we're sort of on pulling together all the work streams. I just want to share your favorite document one more time here, and
I see blue and yellow arrows.
do that change. And the reason I'm sharing this, I get the sense that we're we're doing pretty well on sort of overall timing that. And I think, so we're in this, April timeframe here where,
God.
we discussed, and I'm starting up here with the risk, we discussed with Rue, and that's what we talked about, that David talked about on their results. They're gonna be presenting here on the 25th. On the 16th, we'll have the legal session, so by the end of, I think, by the end of, April. I think we'll know a lot. There'll be some loose ends, but we'll know a lot that we can really start to both integrate. We talked about, some of the integration of risk and reuse. Integrate and even start deliberating on various aspects. I talked about uncertainties and loose ends, but so this is gonna be the period, over the spring and summer that we're gonna be integrating, and then we have the public forum, which is still on the calendar for the 4th of June. You'll know when you look at the meeting schedule that I had, for some reason, I had a public meeting on Monday and a task force meeting on Tuesday, but Chris told me that's crazy. Why don't we just have everything on Tuesday? And I said, you're right. So we're just gonna have the public forum on Tuesday. That's what the 4th is, a public forum. And then this select board briefing is still tentative. We have to wait till the new select board is constituted, and then we'll nail down that date. But I will be putting together a report outline. So I just think we're still in pretty good shape for delivering, on about November 1st, a report. And between now and then, I'm gonna have to help us get the soft landing in terms of deliberations, decisions, etc. And but as far as our research, I think we made some really good progress, and there are a few things to do, obviously. But so it's just changed a little bit, and I'll put this in the meeting pack because it's just little changes on it. But I have a slight obsession with this chart, as you know.
But it's a good one.
It's a good chart.
Well, what's the expectation for producing a polished report? I'm sure we're all willing to write a piece of it, but, putting it all together as a document, editing it, format, all that kind of stuff. Are we on our own? Do we have any access to an editor?
I think we'll have, I haven't talked to Megan and Chris about that yet. The report that we did for reuse, we got help from the town in terms of formatting and editing. So I think we should just focus.
Some of the graphics.
So we have an outline and graphics, when we have an outline, we'll just, we'll determine what to write, and then also. I'll worry about that, and I'll eventually make it your worry too, about editing and finishing in graphics, but that'll happen hopefully the last month or so, and then, we as a group gonna have to review this report multiple times.
Did you ever have to fill out the grant applications back in your consulting days? Must be this font, must be these margins, must be, oh my God.
And the government was the worst of all.
And they would turn you down if your font was wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Well, for the rough drafting,
Yeah.
we'll have some
I
guidance.
think there's a charge,
Final
the
stuff.
select board's charge that we use them.
Shelton Bowl, or else.
Yeah, I mean, I think this should be a nice report, should be graphically readable, and it should
Yeah,
be,
I was
it
just
should be dense.
comparing it with the housing production plan or the recreation plan. I wasn't looking forward to writing
But
20% of, creating 20% of that.
No,
Looking
but
at
I don't know how long this report should be, but this report is under 100 pages.
also, there's stuff we could put in appendices.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think, what we get, what goes into the body, but like this type of memo can go, into an appendix with a very short summary into the body.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of things,
Yeah.
a lot of other reports to refer
You got
to.
the rule report.
We don't have to have a long history in the site, a little bit, so I think we should get to the meat. So, good question. As with other things, I don't have all the answers, but it'll all turn out well. Okay. You have the floor on it.
It's okay.
One of the charges, I think, I don't know the exact terminology, is to look at funding opportunities, grant opportunities available for the
Yeah,
town, so.
so I really focused on sort of two aspects. One would be, there's gonna be continued planning, engineering, design.
Can I just interrupt, since
Yeah.
we're the only people that have copies of this,
Yeah.
should I? The worthwhile putting this up on the screen or?
Yeah, well, pretty
I don't
graph.
think so. It's
Okay.
just a lot of text.
Just look,
It's a lot of text. No,
Just for those on the.
once again, I focus on funding that would come to the town. So that's one thing. And I focus on funding for two things. One is the continued planning, pre-development work. And then secondly, funding to deal with the actual, if the town acquires the site and has to make infrastructure improvements, what's the funding for that? I didn't look at funding for ultimate, development, building projects for two reasons. One, we don't know what that's gonna be yet. And secondly, if it is a private party that's funding, the private party has to raise, not the town. And I don't really have my, I'm not sure what the funding is for something more specialized, like a recreation center or the facility. So I would say there are, there's a variety of funding sources. Primarily, through MAPC, the Technical Assistance Program, I think, is that what's funding the roof study? I think maybe.
Yeah, tag,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, so,
tag,
yeah.
the tag grant.
Yeah, well, anyway, so MAPC has a grant program for technical assistance, hire, consultants or do other work. Then there's the state has something called the Community Planning Grant Program. Mass Development has a site readiness program and a real estate services, they provide technical assistance. So there are some grant programs that the town could get for doing more detailed planning work or perhaps doing site engineering work in advance of putting in the infrastructure. Perhaps even doing feasibility analysis, for a housing project or the assisted living project. And then in terms of actually funding infrastructure at the site, there's basically two state programs. One is called Mass Work. It's a competitive grant program. It makes fairly large grants of, a few $100,000 up to a few million for infrastructure that would contribute to economic development or housing development. And then the state just authorized a new program just for housing. It's like a Mass Work. It's called the Housing Works Infrastructure Program. It's to be implemented next fiscal year. Similar type of program, grants for infrastructure or transportation to support housing development. So, I think I'd say, so just on the sort of grant sources, there are a number of sources, but they're all tied to a reuse goal that the program has, which is typically either housing or economic development. So it will depend, I think the town's ability to access those funding sources will depend on what uses it's looking for.
What's the dollar on that? Are we talking about 5-figure grants, 6-figure
Well, the
grants?
sort of pre-development funds run from a few tens of thousands up to maybe a few $100,000. And then, you could get a $5 million Mass Works grant. I mean, I'm not sure the site, the $5 million grant, but, the site, the Mass Works, there's sort of the engineering side, which would be a few $100,000, and then there's actually the grant to build the infrastructure, which, could be a few million. But it's a competitive grant
I
program.
was just gonna ask how competitive.
And it is pretty competitive and, I think the nature of the benefit, the nature of that scale of economic development and the scale of housing that the infrastructure will support is gonna be a factor. So if, for example, you're the town of Yarmouth and you're putting in a new sewer system to create, 1,000 units of infill housing along Route 28, that might be looked at more favorably than building 100 a grant that would build 100 units, but there, if you look at in a given year. I mean, they give out like 20 or 30 of these grants, so there are quite a few of them are given out. But, it's not a main transportation artery, it's not, it's not infrastructure that will support multiple sites. So I do think that will make it less competitive. But, it's gonna depend on how much money that legislature appropriates for the program, and how many other projects there are in a particular year. But that's where the serious money is in that infrastructure. Then I'd also point out that putting aside grants, there are sort of funding mechanisms that the town could use to help fund the infrastructure. Under state law, there's something called district improvement financing, which the rest of the world calls tax increment financing. And the basic notion there is you could take the tax revenue increase from development that will come from an infrastructure investment and use a portion of that to pay for the infrastructure. So, if the town would get another, $2 million a year in tax revenue, it could say, we'll create this district. We'll put half of that tax revenue into this district, then it could borrow against that, or it could use that as a pay-as-you-go basis to fund that infrastructure.
But that's the town's own money.
That would be money that we'd otherwise get, right, yeah. But then there's also assessments. You could, if you're making improvements that benefit property owners, improvements for roads and sewer or water, you can charge a betterment assessment on top of the taxes. So that's like new revenue. So
Like our sewer connection fee.
what?
It's like our sewer connection fee.
Right, yeah, in a sense. So for example, if an assisted living project went in, they could, beyond taxes, you could charge an assessment onto that project to help cover the infrastructure costs that you would install. So that's another way the town could potentially help fund the costs, even though it isn't the grant source. I would just say SKIO added two funding sources. One is low income housing tax credits. That's not really relevant. That would go to a private developer for development of low income housing. It's not really a funding source that town can use for anything. And then community development block grants, the federal government program goes by entitlement to communities over 50,000 people, but for smaller cities, the money flows to the state. So the state, the county could apply to the Massachusetts Small Cities Community Development Program for funding, but those are funds for low and moderate income benefit. So if it was to use that money to fund infrastructure at the site, there would have to be, housing or something, or services. So, maybe you could use that money to help offset the costs of building housing for art or something like that, but it has to have a low moderate income benefit or potentially an elimination of blight benefit under the federal law, but I'm not sure the site, after it's already cleaned up, would qualify for elimination of blight. So that's kind of a synopsis of what's available. Yeah.
Go ahead, Dave.
Two things, and it's harkening back to the research Pam and I and Kara did. The communities that we dealt with, although they were looking for funding to help with the cleanup, which is not us, not us. Did say, and there were a couple others that I found that I didn't do in the report, Pittsfield, Iron Horse Park in Billerica. There were state programs that were specifically set up to help communities recover brownfield sites.
Right. Yeah. No,
And I didn't hear any of those by name, but
No, but
maybe what
if
you're.
actually you look at the memo, there's a list of programs I don't think will qualify for.
Oh, okay.
And so the Brownfields Redevelopment Fund is for environmental assessment and remediation.
Right.
So we don't need that. there's something called the Mass Development Underutilized Properties Program. That's for buildings, for underutilized vacant buildings, so we don't have any buildings on the site. So anyway, so there are some other things, but and the EPA Brownfield Program similarly is.
That was the other question. and
Is
maybe
not,
Paris-
is for assessment and cleanup and other
Okay,
activities.
so there aren't really federal ones
Yeah.
either.
No, and then there's the
Okay.
USEDA Economic Development Administration has funded a lot of projects on brownfield sites, but as the name would imply, there'd be economic development projects. And typically EDA looks for projects that are both a priority under the regional comprehensive economic development strategy and that are in areas with the unemployment rate and poverty like below the national average. So
Thank
it's
you.
not, Concord's not gonna qualify for those.
Well, practically, did you find any grants that would be for something that wouldn't be housing? It wouldn't be. for-
Economic development, I mean, if we wanted to, I mean, I'm not saying there's a market there, but, if, we were gonna develop a office park there or, look
Didn't
for,
you, when you.
look for, battery manufacturing or, I don't know, small business incubators or,
Ammunition. plant.
small, well, or like. Small work, something that would be like co-working space or workshop space for artisans, or, something that would have a job creation
But
benefit. but-
practically, I thought that you actually talked. Somebody who could talk to developers and really the only thing
Right, housing was,
that
but they
with
said.
housing was really the only
Right,
economically feasible
Right, so I
thing
think-
to do at the
That's-
site.
right,
or-
That's what we heard.
Yeah, so I think based on what the market's saying, it would have to be, to get the MassWorks grant or the Housing Works grant. It would have to be for housing, we'd have. to
And
be
if it's for
building-
housing, the only developers who would be interested in putting housing there would be interested in a big 40B kind of thing.
Well, it won't be a 40B anymore.
It wouldn't have to be at 40B, it could be something like, I mean, there are other possibilities. If somebody's gonna go for the very complicated tax credit financing, then you're, by definition, it's almost a big deal. But, with inexpensive land, subsidized in some way by EPA and the town, it's possible that somebody might build, low-rise, small houses, whatever, if that's.
Yeah, I mean, I just think from the state's point of view, there's a huge housing shortage.
Yeah.
And I don't think they'll want to make a large grant for a small amount of housing, right? So I think from the state's point of view, they'll probably want to invest in infrastructure that's gonna, and now you have a lot of, MBTA communities that are up zoning. And I imagine quite a few of them don't necessarily have sewer capacity or, to support that. So I imagine, I'm speculating here, but I think the MBTA Community Act is gonna increase the demand potentially for infrastructure investments associated with some of those districts. So there's probably gonna be more competition, for some of this funding. So I think you'd have to be building, a few hundred units of housing likely to get one of those grants. I mean, that's my sort of sense.
I don't know, I think you might, something 50 to 100 might, depending.
Maybe. Also, if it's something,
And because part of the need is workforce housing, because it's
yeah,
all gonna be high.
Right. yeah. I mean, I think you'd have to be saying you were addressing a critical need. So like, for example, if you had relatively low-cost entry-level home ownership opportunities that the market isn't providing now, you might be able to make a compelling case. For some.
Some of the housing in
something like that.
Devon's was targeted at that.
Yeah,
So let me ask you, slightly off topic, but if the select board says, well, okay, task force, we'd like to generate revenue from the site. Is the only way to generate revenue right now, we're thinking tax revenues from housing? So are there any other, putting aside municipal uses? What other, how could we answer that question about?
Well, I mean, we heard from the what are the other options? I mean, basically industrial and office and retail. What we heard was, no, it's not a good site for retail. The market for offices isn't good, and this is not centrally, this is not transportation accessible. I mean, if somebody were gonna build another office park here, they'd much rather build it in NCI. And,
After the road is fixed.
and that leaves industrial. I've heard people say, there's room for a little bit of the kind of industrial space that has existed along Baker Ave. Small pilot facilities and stuff like that. But it doesn't come up when you talk to the developers.
But there's not a lot of land value in that type of development.
So we won't be able to answer that question with an exciting answer, basically, it's.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't think so. No.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's best to look at this as what meets the biggest collective municipal needs, with municipal being defined beyond municipal government to other things the town needs.
And there are a lot of municipal needs.
So we don't really monetize our municipal needs either, but when we looked at the Colorado recreation structure that they had as in the reuse committee, that structure, it had a swimming pool, tennis courts, it was associated with the park. It had a large cafeteria, meeting spaces, and event spaces. So they had their council on aging equivalent luncheons and events and stuff like that, but they also rented out their facilities to weddings, and they actually made some money that supported their programs by sharing facilities there.
But
But we haven't looked at the idea of municipal ownership, but still monetizing it.
yeah, but you have to, that revenue would come to help offset the cost of building the facility.
Yeah, right, I mean, that's the problem.
So.
It's not a net
and you-
revenue
Right,
generator.
there'd probably still be a subsidy for the
Well,
facility.
unless the
but-
town owned it and then leased the space to some company that wanted to.
I mean,
Sort of
yeah.
profit from that model.
I mean, one of the,
Yeah.
I mean, the town could do something like this, it could say, we own the site, we're interested in a range of potential uses, it could be a recreational and event facility. It could be some type of housing of a certain use. It could be some mix of office and light industrial, something like that, it could solicit development proposals from private operators or private developers and see
And that is-
what
Well,
comes out of that process. But
With,
it's.
with
I'm sure that-
attractive leasing terms, as long as there was, revenue stream.
Right, it could,
Of which part would go back to EPA, but.
it could then select the proposals, assuming it got a lot of proposals, which it may or may not.
Right, because I've always said we have a really nice piece of land and there's a lot of municipal needs, but. It might be attractive to certain industries,
Yes.
like the recreational industry, there are a lot of those. Not that we want to compete.
Doesn't help
with
with
the
the
other-
hockey rink across the street.
no.
Yeah, and there's the
Well,
throw
the hockey
club.
rink and throw club, but there's a lot
Yeah.
that they don't, so you don't do a hockey rink, you don't do a swimming pool.
Is anyone aware of private outside interests approaching anybody about, I might be interested, we might be interested, but where are you going with this? Is anybody aware of any of that yet?
Paul, did the Edge ever say anything about wanting that site?
Who?
The Edge, the group that's been Bedford where.
Yeah, way back then, yeah, so Edge Sports develops a fairly large sports complex, and the one in Wellesley is huge. They have to see a market, but yeah, I mean, I think we would approach them again, but we'd be interested in developing
But
something.
if that's somebody that's thought about it, maybe they would be somebody to talk to for a quick idea of what.
Yeah, Edge Sports is a very well-known group in Massachusetts.
Where are they based?
Who, they have a nice website, don't know.
Okay, I'll find it.
I spoke to the president way back. And he said, yeah, when we get closer, let's talk about it, because they're always
I
looking
mean,
for, they're
yeah,
always looking for land in areas where there's a market, especially if they're all a bunch of 40Bs floating around, there's been a lot of people, and,
I mean, there's always the possibility that there's a individual company that's looking for a site for its own future expansion needs, and for whatever reason, maybe the owner lives in Concord or something like that.
Or,
They might
know,
have interest in it.
it's a company that needs high-end technicians and engineers and scientists like live in Concord, there are a bunch, I'm thinking
But it's
along
hard to.
roads
But you
out in
can't-
Bedford and so forth, but finding those specific, this is a very rambling kind of speculative conversation.
But I think putting out, at some point, putting out RFPs for, for a site that's clean and open space and graded, we'll see who bites that, and I think, there might be some bites from that.
So if you can get it, and also ask them whether they had an arrangement like this with some other town facility, so that they could give you an example of the numbers of what the
I
town.
took an old property in Wellesley, which is an old church site.
Yeah.
And, yeah, so, and there are other firms like them.
You've mentioned several times about the opportunity to have the site graded for what we might have in
Right.
mind, well, they're still there. Are there things that would not want it? Are there possible uses that would not want it? Like
Graded flat.
big and flat? If there are multiple uses on the site, would they like kind of a visual bridge between uses? And how
I'm
hard
not
is
an
that to
expert
deal
on
with that?
Nine hole
I don't
golf course.
either, I'm just.
Kitchen putt golf course.
I think certain types of housing,
So,
No.
the slope, the site right now slopes up, and
Yes.
there are tiers of.
Yep.
Parking decks,
Mhm.
and they will be removing parking deck things, and the question is whether they grade it all flat, whether they
Right.
grade some of it flat, whether when they dug out something
And
that is
under the
only on the
foundations,
surface.
under the slabs,
Yeah.
is that soil we can use, or is it more that has to be taken away?
Well, but also, would you wanna build something into the hillside that's like a structure that,
Mhm.
is like the high school is built right now,
Right.
where it's higher on one side than on the other.
so,
So that's a possibility
Same.
too, if someone would wanna say, don't regrade it,
Mhm.
we wanna build into how it's.
Well, until you have a new
Yeah.
user.
So the last
Yeah,
meeting-
hard to say.
last meeting, I mentioned that when we were on site with Bruce, we talked about input on grading. The 2026 timeframe is when we really have to,
Right.
because they're still doing a lot of work, and so we haven't run out of that possibility, and. I mean, the timing is good, because if the town wants to proceed, that's right in the planning stage, where we're gonna start to know. About what we're gonna use it for, and then we can start to have real input into grading. Right now, we can't do that, but
And that's what our report to the select board will say. That we can have some influence on the final restoration and grading and so forth. And that's something the town needs to look at having an influence on in its decision as to whether to acquire and control. But we can't predict
let
specific.
it go hand in hand with the plan, I mean. There'd be a planning period from 2025 to 2027, right? Before we can do anything, before we get this, what's it called, this
Swaru,
Swaru site ready for reuse.
Sounds like a nasty party.
Yeah, so, good, well, good discussion. Any other questions on, so if you were to, write a chapter on grant applicant, are there any, I mean, other than here, is there any path to pursue right now?
Well, I mean, there are probably, there are probably some grants the town could pursue as it gets into, if it does decide to acquire the site, it is gonna do more planning work, more engineering work around the site. There are sources it can use. That's sort of the medium term source. The longer term, if indeed it is looking to develop the site for housing, then it could pursue, one of the infrastructure grants.
I think we have to have another conversation with our state representatives too. I mean, there's gonna be a tremendous competition with MCI and everything going on there, and,
Right.
but, what I
There's
have.
also earmarks, yeah.
Oh, there- Well,
So-
if I talked to an unnamed state representative, he mentioned earmarks.
Right,
and,
so
those
there are a lot of
but-
outside sections to the budget that,
And then,
provide
there's
funding
been,
for-
my understanding, a lot of
projects,
successful earmarking for development in Acton. So I don't know how much we benefit as a town from that, but. Yeah, that's another Do I have a chapter earmarks? Yes,
So the one comparison between MCI Concord and our site is MCI Concord has a wastewater treatment plant there. They do not have to worry about preparing anything for septic. So that's not a limitation on the number of housing units that you
Right.
could put there, or business units, or
They're gonna have a lot of
business
people.
that actually uses water, or.
No, I mean, that site's well served by infrastructure, unlike this site, and much better located, you know.
Yeah, right. I mean, I'm sure that the commercial developers will be quite interested. That's. And as a matter of fact, one of the discussions we had was, well, yeah, you know, if it was over closer to Route 2, it'd be more interesting.
Mhm.
okay, let me just review the meeting dates one last time, then I'll get public comment and then we'll move on, but let me share this. Okay, just to review where we are, so the 16th and the 25th of April, those are those two briefing meetings. We'll go into executive session on the 16th. 25th will be the lion's share of that will be the risk. Let me blow this up a little bit. Will be the risk discussion. We'll have two meetings in May. This will all go on the website because they're different locations. June 4th will be the public hearing. I don't have the select board briefing on here because we don't know when that's going to be. We'll have, so I have 3 meetings here in July. We may not need 3 meetings in July. I'm inclined to maybe lock this one up. We'll have 2 meetings in July, but so we're gonna go. Pam Hill remarked at the last meeting that we shouldn't have meetings when we don't have to, and I said, of course not. And I want to make sure that we have meetings where we're getting something done, but I believe that starting in May, we're going to have to roll up our sleeves and really plan how this report's going to look and talk and have, discussions about what we think we're going to recommend here.
Right.
And discussions about what the uncertainties are, and whether the uncertainties are manageable to make any recommendation. At some point, we may just say there's too much uncertain. I don't believe so, but we're gonna have to kind of juggle.
Is this
All
the
that.
same list that you emailed us?
It's the same list, and
I mean, it seems like, I mean, it depends how long it takes us to reach decisions on recommendations, but it seems like once we have a report out and we know who's assigned which sections of the report, and we know what our recommendations are, our time is sort of, there might be a hiatus in need for devoting our time to working on the report.
I agree. So I mean, in that September, maybe the no meetings in September, it's all writing. Maybe just
Even
one.
maybe by
Yeah.
August, we get to that.
Yeah.
We'll see.
I can see some questions on communication if we have a break in meetings, but multiple people reading drafts of things.
Yeah.
Just being very.
And so
careful about-
that's the intent of the schedule. It's pretty solid through June.
Mhm.
And then we'll see where we are at that point, but we're gonna post this on the website when Chris finds me the location for the October 15th meeting, and when he does QA on this whole thing, because.
You've got it.
What's that?
You've got it. It's here. The 15th is here.
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I sent you the.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me stop sharing. Okay, so that's all that's on the agenda for this meeting. Do we have any comments from the public? Our friends? Public.
I don't have any, thank you.
Hey, Terry.
I,
One's got a hand up.
Okay, nobody else is. Okay. Yes,
I wanted to ask about the executive session. Is that the entire meeting, is the executive session?
I'm gonna start the meeting. We vote to go into executive session, and then we're in executive session. You'll be it.
I am invited.
Yes, you are.
We have minutes, 12 minutes to. At least.
Yes.
Yeah.
Has anybody seen the play The Minutes at the Umbrella?
Yes,
You seen it?
No,
I have not.
It's a controversial thing that the select board did, and they buried the minutes to hide the controversial thing they did.
Mhm.
But the denouement is what the minutes actually said, what's called the minutes. So I'm just saying that
Should I
in
have-
minutes,
should I
I
have
would be
gone?
suspicious.
David, should I have gone?
Yes,
Yeah,
I think anybody who's been in town government as long as you have.
I kept thinking
Sherry.
next weekend, and then it just didn't happen.
I haven't heard the word.
And I'm the one who founded the performing arts program there.
I haven't heard the word denouement used at a public meeting yet, but thank you. Make sure that's in the minutes.
denouement, David used the French word.
Well, we know what it is. I'm nodding, but I just have to do it. It's a beautiful word. Okay, any other business? Then we are adjourned until the 16th. Thank you very much.